Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to cover you for the standard metagame challenge for the best decks you can take to the event. We've been covering standard for the last week or so since Dragonstorm Tarkir came out. If you're looking for best of one content, it's on the channel as well. But normally what we do on the channel is cover the best decks, looking at Untapped GG stats, what you see on the screen, MTGO leagues, if there's big tournaments. Pull it all together, give you a nice concise summary of what the decks of the week are. We will be catching up with the other formats on Arena as well. I put out a historic best of one deck lists yesterday, and we'll cover Explorer, Alchemy, Timeless, best of one, best of three in the next coming days as we catch up. So with metagame challenge, basically 2,000 gold in. If you win 7 games in a row, no losses, you win 30 packs, bunch of gold back as well. Really fun event. We had the Explorer metagame challenge last week as well. So jumping into it, looking at the popularity of the decks, and I'll paste these deck lists in the video description so you can copy and paste. But Izzet Prowess is the deck that's had the biggest jump if we look at its play rate. From the set release, Izzet was about 8%, and it's jumped all the way up to nearly 20% thanks to Corey Steelcutter. We have Esper Self-Balanced Pixie decks at about 7%, Mono Red 7%, Jeskai controlled the dragon deck at 7%. Oculus at 6, Azorius Omni at 5, and then Orzhov Control, which is a mashup of the older Ketramos kind of exile everything control decks, as well as Orzhov Pixie, which is a slower, more controlling version of the Pixie bounce deck. And then lastly, Domain at 4%. So we will look mythic rank from the set release to today, so 10 days worth of data, 15,000 matches played. The mice are the top deck, 73% here. So pretty much stock deck here. We have the Lightning Strikes main, 3 Witch Stalker Frenzies. Some of these decks are starting to adapt Tursa into the deck, trimming on the number of Witch Stalker Frenzies. Tursa gives you another avenue to kind of curate your deck. Sometimes with this deck, you're just going to be, you draw too many lands. It doesn't really benefit you in that manner, so you can discard those extra lands and instead draw cards. So from that, it lets you also play cards from your graveyard. So that's something that you might want to consider in that respect. Sideboard, you got Graveyard Hate, Lithomantic Barrage, blue and white stuff. Kind of with the increase of Oculus decks, the Jeskai Dragons gives you a little bit more flexibility there. Torch Tower for the creature mirrors. Furbrass Forge for the kind of grindier matchups, and then Sunspine Links for Domain, Pixie, anything that's trying to gain life. One thing you might want to consider in your sideboard, Abrade has a lot more utility now than it previously did. With Abrade, you're able to hit Corey Steelcutter. Another card you may want to consider in the sideboard is Pyroclasm. Against the Prowess decks, while they can make a very wide board, on your turn, they usually don't have Prowess effects up because they're inclined to cast 2 spells on their turn to maximize damage. So they have a bunch of 1 and 2 toughness creatures that you can sweep that way there. I don't necessarily love Forge right now. I think I prefer Case of the Crimson Rose because people are naturally going to have Authority of the consoles, and this pretty much is dead against Authority of consoles. Against Bounce, they can just reset it and bounce, and people are a little bit more respectful of artifacts now, again, because of Corey Steelcutter. We have Esper Self-Bounce, 70%. So the card that the deck is adapted from the new set is Sun Pearl Kirin. So another bounce kind of effect, 2 mana, flash speed, you could bounce something back, and it's also got the ability, if you bounce a token, that you get to draw a card from it. Your normal bounce effects, Momentum Breaker, Nowhere to Run, Storm Chasers, kind of for utility. We have a 2-2 split of Preacher and Stock Up, and then 2 Kaidos in the main. This town ain't big enough, also provides some utility with just bouncing your various effects, can bounce your opponent's things, keeps you alive in that respect. This is a deck that does get hit kind of hard from Sunspine Links, but you do have some life gain and Momentum Breaker in the main board. Sideboard, another Kaido for the grindier matchups. Against like heavy removal decks, Kaido dodges a lot of like sweepers, stuff like that. Temporary Lockdown is very good against the Izzet decks, against mice, stuff of that nature. Lorn for Artifact Enchantment Hate, No More Lies, cheap counter, Destroy Evil for enchantments and bigger creatures. Grim Baubles, cheap removal, Graveyard Hate, and Ghost Vacuum. You have Duress for Hand Hate, Dreams of Steel and Oil. So that's kind of there. High Noon could potentially be played against if you really want to kind of stop the Prowess decks. We then have Jeskai Oculus, so 69%. So this deck here is leveraging a bunch of discard effects. Tersa Light Shatter, you have Profs, Fear of Missing Out, Glacial Dragon Hunt. So these all can make Mako very large through just drawing and discarding. You're putting cards into your graveyard and then using things like Helping Hand and Recommission to bring back Oculus or other threats. Steamcore Scholar can get very large. And then you have Winter Night Stories, another draw discard, but also has the ability of Harmonize. So you can cast this from your graveyard with a reduced cost based on tapping creatures. So it's 5 mana, but Steamcore Scholar can attack and then you can Harmonize. You do lose out on the Edict's kind of power up, but it's another way to kind of get some advantage. Tishana's Tidebinder for activated abilities or triggered abilities. This is activated or triggered. You have Filigree Silex just as a sweeper, reasonable against like Pixie because you can hit some of their enchantments. Can hit this Quarry Steel Cutter. That name just always gets stuck on my tongue. Sheltered for the aggressive decks, negate cheap counters, destroy evil. Again, enchantment, big things, Spell Pierce, cheap disruption, Ghost Vacuum for graveyard deck mirrors. Selesnya Cage, 69%. So this deck here is going to be using Collector's Cage. Collector's Cage, what you're trying to do is get 3 different powers. When it comes to play, you hide away something, so kind of sneak it underneath. If you then activate it with 3 different powers, you cast that card for free. Big payoff is Craterhoof Behemoth to overrun your team. Elspeth is another way it plays really nicely with all the various token themes. When you offspring their tokens, so you get value, the Sanguine Evangelist, Sandstorm Salvager, all ways to make some tokens there. You have Bright Glass Gearhulk, which allows you to have access to kind of toolbox effect. So a Duskro's Reliquary, Haywire Might, Nurturing Pixie, and then kind of their Paw Patch in your elves. So you kind of make a bunch of tokens, go wide, and then overrun your opponent. In the sideboard, you have Wiltleaf Liege for the Pixie decks, discard decks. You have Split Up for kind of creature mirrors, Aven Interrupter for sweeper decks, Sheltered by the red decks, Graveyard Hate, Artifact Enchantment Hate, and then more Graveyard Hate. The one thing that you might want to consider is Authority of the Consoles. It really messes up the aggressive decks and is tutorable with Bright Glass Gearhulk. So this is the Tersa version of the deck. So I can include that. So pretty much stock. We see the Case of the Crimson Pulse in there. In addition to some of the other effects, you still have kind of the density land counts. You're just getting rid of Monastery Swift Spirit in the main. So you still have your Lizard package. So pretty much the same if you want to see it. We then go to Dimir Midrange. So this deck here, kind of elements of the bounce deck, but obviously you're not bouncing stuff, just kind of good value stuff. ETBs, cheap evasive creatures that allow you to Kaido in, bunch of removal, anoint, go for the throat, cut downs, some cheap counters, some tap down effects, and then like Preacher can Stonewall, draw a bunch of cards off Curiosity, and get command as a sweeper. Soulstone Sanctuary acts as a ninja for Kaido as well. More sweepers, Shieldred for like to gain you some life in the grindier matchups, anything drawing a bunch of cards like the Beans deck, Urtai, removal, counter, Flash Body, activated abilities, sweepers for the aggressive decks, Fairy Mastermind for the Beans decks, anything that's drawing a lot, Disdainful Stroke as a cheap counter, Anoint is cheap removal, you have some Duresses, and then just kind of some cheap disruption, Graveyard Hate mixed into it. I think this deck may struggle a bit against Izzet just because you can't deal with artifacts. And it doesn't have the bounce element of Pixie that you can kind of reset. Speaking of Izzet, we have Izzet Prowess. So this deck here is all built around Quarry Steel Cutter. So whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 monk, and then it gets Prowess, and you can attach the equipment to it. The equipment gives that creature +1/1 haste and trample. So very strong. You can do it on both players' turns if you cast 2 spells. So you're just kind of double spelling. You have Bolt Waves, you have some burn removal, some cheap disruption, cantrips, so like Ops, Sleight of Hands. I've like Crash Through. I've been playing an Alchemy version of the deck with the Chorus cards. Crash Through gives you residual creatures trample as well, because when you move the counters, your initial creature would get ideally 2 Prowess triggers, so it's a 3/3, but it loses trample, so it could get chunk block. With the Crash Through, it still provides that kind of card draw, You lose the scry or the look 2 of like sleight of hand or opt, but you get the trample bonus. So it's kind of a trade-off in that respect. Ren's Resolve, another way to just kind of get some card advantage, stock up. Some of these decks are playing Hearth Elemental, and you can also consider things like Torch the Tower in the main if you are running into more creature-dense versions of the format. One of Spell Pierce, obviously nice to have, but I think just consistency. Bolt Wave, again, is another card that Bolt Wave always has a target, unlike Torch the Tower, so if you're going against like a control deck, it might not be as useful. But the downside is it doesn't do much in the kind of aggressive mirrors. You could try to race sometimes, but it's not always a given. Ral for the kind of heavier removal matchups. Pyroclasm for the mirror, creature decks, negate cheap counters, Braid for kind of the mirror, artifacts, more cheap removal along with Torch. Spell Pierce for cheap disruption into the Flood Maw for bounce, and then Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate. Your domain, 65%, so pretty much stock. Zur animates the Overlords. You're a base green-white deck. You're leveraging things like Overlord of the Hauntwoods to help you ramp. All your big spells, Ride Ends, Sunfall, kind of get alternate well, not Sunfall, but Overlord, Ride Ends, both the Overlords, Leyline Binding, all get alternative costing to be lower, but still trigger up the Beanstalk. Analyze the Pollen helps you hit lands early, but late game can be used to tutor Zur or some of your Overlords, Beza. Main board Temporary Lockdown's nice. I think that is something you need to consider in this meta, given it is a bit more aggressive. Nissa's for kind of the mirror, grindier matchups, Atraxa against like Dimir, any of the kind of, even against like bounce decks, it's not the worst because you get to refill your hand. Hellish Norn for anything with a lot of ETBs like Dimir. Obstinate Baloth for discard decks. Stock up for the grindier matchups. Terra Sunder, flexible removal. You have Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. Paw Patch, flexible removal. Negate cheap counters. Elspeth Smite for the aggressive decks. We then have Orzhov Pixie or Orzhov Control. So we see the Kirans in here. You have your discard package, Hopeless Nightmare plus a Tiny Bones. So 8 bounce effects, temporary lockdown. In this version here, you're using, seems kind of counterintuitive. You're playing stuff that's cheap that would get lockdown, but the intent is you lock down stuff and then bounce the lockdown back to your hand. You get all the ETBs again, force them to discard multiple times. So just like reusing Nightmare over and over is kind of a win con in this deck. You have Liliana to eat at their hand. You have the Demons of Archfiend and Unholy Annex to get you some value as well. Sideboard, you have Bezos for the aggressive decks, mid-range decks, Preacher, again, for the grindier decks. Lauren, Artifact Shaman Hate, Graveyard Hate, and Rest in Peace. Pest Control for the aggressive decks. Destroy Evil, like we mentioned, Gribobble is more cheap removal, and then 5 pieces of Hand Hate as situationally needed. We have Jeskai Control, Dragons. So Shiko is the big card here, lets you recast stuff. So these versions have like varied numbers of Rediscover the Way as kind of a refill effect. This version here is playing fewer copies. There's also a combo, if you're not aware, with Shiko and 3 Blind Mice. Shiko creates a copy of 3 Blind Mice, and then 3 Blind Mice can make copies of the copies, which exponentially grow every turn. This is something that was like kind of a pseudo meta deck in Alchemy, since there's ways to kind of make copies of it there. But it's kind of opted out in this one, just a little bit more interactive, temporary lockdown playing to the board. Stock up's kind of a big card to just, you know, you get a 4/5 flying vigilance that lets you cast a stock up for free. Seems pretty good value. Bunch of cheap interaction. We see the Abraid's main, Lightning Helix, Get Lost, Dispelling Exhale as a counterspell works with your dragons. And then your top end, you have Chandra's, Meringue River Regents, draw, discard, bounce, return, and then Jeskai Revelation as kind of your big top end threat. Creates creatures, removal, bounce, draw cards, gains life. You can double it up with Chandra as well. Oddly enough, like this Kori Mountain Monastery works better in a control deck, I find, than like the aggressive decks. Some of the mono red decks have been trying this, but it's so awkward having your land come into play tapped. Jace for the mirrors, domain, anything that you're trying to mill them out. Bezos for aggressive decks, activated abilities, graveyard decks with Kutsuo Flanker. Pyroclasm for the aggressive decks, negate, cheap counters, flash freeze. As a way to counter your opponent's red or green spells, exercise, artifact enchantment, and big creatures, and then a Braid as more cheap removal. Moving on, we have mono black mid-range. So this is kind of the demons deck. We see Rot Curse Rakshasha. I like saying that word. That lets you curve nicely Rakshasha into Unholy Annex to start getting the drain. You have the Unstoppable Slasher Bloodletter combo. Scavenger Regent is a sweeper. That is also a creature, so it gives you some flexibility there. Jellies, Preachers, and then just a whole bunch of removal. Your cut downs, Hand Hate with Duress, Anoint, Bitter Triumph, Go for the Throat, Nowhere to Run, Shoot the Sheriff, just lots of ways to kill things. Soulstone Sanctuary, Demolition Field. Again, this is a deck, because it doesn't have access to Artifact Hate, can be a little troublesome. Get Command as a sweeper, Withering Torment as enchantment hate, Horsey Revenant, 3 mana, 3/3, flying Death Touch lifelink. So it can soak up some damage, and then you can exile from the graveyard to put a flying counter, a death touch counter, and a lifelink counter on target creature. So works nice with some of your bigger creatures, just to give some more life gain, stuff like that. Blot Out deals with big creatures, nice way to deal with Kaido cleanly. Strategic Betrayal is a really interesting one. It's a sorcery, 2 mana from the new set that opponent exiles creature they control, so they get a choice, but you also exile their graveyard. So another flexible card that can have kind of dual purpose. Nowhere to Run, cheap removal, graveyard hate, hand hate, hand hate. Well, we have Azorius Omni combo that's been updated 58%. So we have Roiling Dragonstorm. Enters, draw 2, then discard a card. You can rebounce it with Meringue, River Regent. The Meringue as well lets you draw and discard, so just more ways to kind of proactively loot while also giving you an alternative win condition should they attack your graveyard main board. So doing that, we have a bunch of cheap counters, disruptions, lockdowns main, but the core of the deck, Omniscience in the graveyard, you as well as awakening it, and then you cast Invasion of Arcavios, and then with this version of the deck with Jeskai's Revelation, so the first line is very relevant here. Return target spell or permanence to its owner's hand. And then Jeskai Revelation does the rest of the stuff. Previously, the combo required a bunch of pieces in the sideboard. Now with this, you basically can just keep activating over and over again. So you just keep bouncing this, again, get this back from your graveyard over and over, and then burn them out. Sideboard, we have Beza for the aggressive decks. You have Voice of Victory. So Grand Abolisher is technically better. It's a little harder to cast, but with Grand Abolisher, it's also activated ability. So if you have something like Ghost Vacuum, it could shut that off. Otherwise, if you're stuck on Mythic wildcards, Voice of Victory is fine. Negate cheap counters, Get Lost as removal, Disenchant, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Devote Decree, Red and Black Hate, and then some cheap counter spells. And then lastly, 5-color Reanimator, which is really Rakdos Reanimator, but, you know, good old Atraxa loves throwing down 5 colors. So this deck here has got Tursa in here as a way to loot. Overlord of the Baelmerk fills your graveyard, Fear of Missing Out. And then you reanimate with things like Valgoth's Faithful or Zombify to bring back Atali, Atraxa, or Valgavoth. Otherwise, just a bunch of cheap removal mixed into the deck, some hand hate. Shelly for the grindier matchups. Chandra in here for the opponent's got Rest in Peace. Opponent's got a lot of graveyard hate. You can kind of beat them down that way. Preacher as kind of more, you kind of just become like a Rakdos mid-range deck. Brotherhood's End as sweepers, Pyroclasm, Graveyard Hate, Hand Hate, and Cut Down for more cheap removal. That is it for the week. Good luck to those in competing. We will hopefully do a run ourselves, but let me know if you hit any 7-win runs. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one, and stay safe out there.